Hello, I am Giuseppe Civitarese and the author of Bion and the Sublime, Roots of an Aesthetic Paradigm. In this paper, on the one hand, I emphasize the paradigm shift which I think is taking place in psychoanalysis from an historical, evidential, archaeological to an aesthetic one. Then, more explicitly, I try to illuminate some of the notions introduced in psychoanalysis by Bion, who is very much at the center of this change. As everyone knows, however, these notions often seem obscure, esoteric, enigmatic, and unrelated to each other. From Bion's writing, we see that he drew some of these concepts directly from the literature of the Romantic period, for example, from Keats, Coleridge, Milton. This literature, however, is itself the result of a theoretical reflection developed in Europe during the 18th century, and which can be summarized in the aesthetic theory of the sublime. My idea, then, is to try to cast some light on what we may call a subterranean symbolic matrix of Bion's concepts that can help us to render them clearer and more consistent. In fact, in each section of my article, I begin by recalling a specific aspect of the sublime and then illustrate the psychoanalytic concept which in some way corresponds to it. But what does sublime actually mean? When we use this tiny but significant word in daily life for referring to art, we may not be aware that behind it there is quite an extraordinary aesthetic theory. Etymologically, sublime designates what elevates us to the highest threshold, what makes us grow spiritually. The term comes to us from a treatise on rhetoric from classical antiquity. What is discussed there is how the writer can achieve this effect. Subsequently, in the 18th century, with authors such as Burke, Schiller, Kant, and others, we pass from the rhetorical or stylistic sublime to the psychological one. The key idea is that the kind of pleasure that we call sublime arises from a comparison between human limitations and the grandiosity of nature. Something that we see well represented, for instance, in Caspar David Friedrich's paintings. The aesthetic pleasure of the sublime, unlike that of beauty, originates from what at the beginning is a discouraging confrontation, from a pain, from mourning, from a feeling of danger, and then, thanks to our rational faculty, ends up overcoming these feelings. That's why we say that the pleasure of the sublime is always a negative pleasure. So, how could we not think of the sublime if, in reading Bion, we substitute the word object with nature when come across expressions as nameless dread, the unconscious reformulated as infinity, the exaltation of the dark night of the soul in St. John of the Cross, or the negative capability that Keats places at the foundation of all poetics, or the state of sleep, almost stupor, which the analyst should pursue in order to make himself permeable to the immaterial facts of the analysis. Or again, what if we think of the ineffable awe? And then, is the bitemporal dynamic of the sublime not equivalent to losing oneself in the experience of confusion and persecution to become awe, or to be in a paranoid schizoid position before eventually entering into knowledge? If by the infinite and unrefined nature we mean the object, for Freud our first Heimat, we may assume that if faced successfully, the conflict offers us a way to become independent from the object which we are irresistibly attracted. The experience of the sublime in art is therefore a victory over the subjugating power of the object. The emotion of the sublime, the terrible beauty, the horror rendered thinkable by art, consists after all in the subject placing the right distance between himself and the fascinating but frightening object. In the end, what would to represent mean if not placing oneself at a safe distance from a real that is experienced as threatening? if not establishing a meaningful space for vision that reflects the relationships with the primary objects and becomes in addition a set of preconception for subsequent experiences, in the dialectic of the sublime, both directions of the double movement that Bion places at the foundation of thought, when he says that it is born from unison, are represented. First, we find the vertigo of the fall, when we rediscover the condition that characterizes us as human beings, that of being cast out into the world. This fall is then followed by something comparable to the moral elevation of self-consciousness which Kant indicates as the intrinsic dynamics of the sublime, and what for Bion is the unison or equanimity with the object that helps the psyche to grow. These are some of the reasons why we can say that as a theory of unison, the aesthetic of the sublime is an extraordinary model for showing precisely how Bion imagines the development of the psyche might occur. We might ask ourselves, are we all entering an era of a, so to say, romantic psychoanalysis? Thank you.